Bir kez daha hoş geldiniz saygıdeğer misafirlerimiz. İkinci panelimize başlayalım istiyoruz. İkinci panelimizin başlığı Silikon Vadisi'nden İstanbul'a girişim sermayesi için yeni merkezler başlığı altında gerçekleşecek bu zirvemiz, panelimiz. Moderatörümüz Christopher Schroeder, Health Central CEO'su, kendisi Online Publishers Association kurucu ortağı, kendisi yerini aldılar. Hoş geldiniz diyoruz. Top Türkiye Girişim Sermayesi Meclisi Başkanı Sayın Göktekin Dinçerler de aramızdalar. Hoş geldiniz Sayın Dinçerler. Abraş Capital Türkiye yönetici ortağı Sayın Selçuk Yorgancıoğlu da panelist olarak yer alıyorlar bu panelimizde. Küresel Network yöneticisi Elizabeth Beazer Clarkson da yine aramızdalar. Hoş geldiniz diyoruz kendilerine. Ve CMEA Capital'dan yönetici ortak Faysal Suhail de yine bu panelimizde panelist olarak yer alacaklar. Ve efendim Savari Ventures'tan kurucu başkan Ahmet El Alfi de yine panelistlerimiz arasında yer alıyorlar. Ben sözü daha fazla uzatmadan hemen moderatörümüze bırakıyorum bu paneli yönetmek üzere. Buyurunuz.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? I cannot tell you how honored and pleased I'm be here, yet like so many of the folks who've been up here, I wish to thank our hosts who've just put on a spectacular and remarkable event. I want to thank you all for being here at the end of this spectacular and remarkable event, and I'm particularly honored to be with this remarkable panel. I think we'll share some great insight overall. As she mentioned, I'm an internet entrepreneur from the United States and an investor, but I also, over the last year and a half, have been traveling to Turkey and to the Middle East, and I've been writing about this remarkable growth and outburst of entrepreneurship for the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch and other places. And so I just am more fascinated and more encouraged by what I've seen. One of my favorite quotes comes from an American science fiction author named Arthur C. Clarke. And his quote is that technological revolutions are most often overestimated in the short run and underestimated in the long run. Overestimated in the short run, underestimated in the long run. And I think if this conference has done anything as we think about wrapping it all together, it has proven that the long run is now. We are absolutely and positively in a revolution that has been unleashed by information technology that, from my perspective anyways, has allowed two things. First, a new generation now sees how everyone else lives and wants to live that way too. Secondly, they have at their fingertips incredibly cheap tools and capabilities to start up businesses, to share, expand, and grow them in a wonderful new series of communities that they develop. But I think also it's been a revolution of outlook. This new generation not only questions dictators, they will question their successors, and they are questioning all of us 40 years old and over who expect anything less of them on a going forward basis. And it's a part of this broader revolution, I think, which is so important, and we'll talk about in a moment, in what we used to call the emerging markets overall. In fact, I've stopped using the word emerging markets. I now say emerged markets. We know that global investment is rushing into what we call the BRICS. They are rushing into Africa. And we also in this room know that there's no greater opportunity than Turkey and MENA overall. And because of what's happened elsewhere, I will suggest, I think it's going to happen much more faster in combination with the technology that we have right now. It's interesting that the title of our panel talks about Silicon Valley, and I'll never forget being with Arif and Fadi a year ago at the Celebration of Entrepreneurship, where one of the other Americans said, this incredible gathering of entrepreneurs feels like a Silicon Valley gathering. And Arif turned back and looked at him and winked and said, what is Silicon Valley? And I think he was making a very important point, because this isn't about one location, though ecosystems are important, but it really is about these new generations creating for their cultures, on their terms, in their voices, and again, due to technology, it can be almost instantly global as well as local. I will frame this conversation now with another great quote from President John Kennedy, who was once asked, are you a pragmatist or are you a dreamer? And Kennedy did not skip a beat. He said, I'm an idealist without illusion. And I think very much I'm sitting now with men who are idealists without illusion. We know that there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we also know something is happening here of massive historic proportion. And so I'm going to start with you, Ahmet Alfi, the founder of Savari Ventures, who spent 18 years as a successful investor in the United States, and before all of this, chose to go back to Egypt, and now has been part and parcel in understanding what's going on. And I'd love to know where you are idealistic and where you are without illusion, particularly in recent events in Egypt.
Idealistic Well, I have the pleasure of interacting on a regular basis before and after the revolution with quite a few of the revolutionaries, being that they were all on Facebook and Twitter, and I happen to spend quite a bit of my life on both of those venues. The biggest changes I would say that I'm seeing happening, at least in my little ecosystem, are that an acceleration of the boldness of the young people. They have no fear. In the old family way in Egypt, the way you look at it, they have no shame. They don't take orders from anybody anymore. They take suggestions. They take guidance. They will listen to you if you tell them, this is what I would do if I were in your place, and then go make their decisions. There is also a sense or a reduction in the fear, I think, maybe I'm being optimistic, on the part of the investors and the angels in Egypt. And they're thinking that the large government bureaucracies and the large mega companies won't be the only solution, and it might be in the national interest to fund these smaller projects. This is a struggle that's happening in Egypt. And by the way, cut me off whenever you want, because I can keep going for a long time.
This is important.
Egypt, for me, the struggle is something that Turkey is really the dictionary or encyclopedia on, which is the kind of balance of military, Islamist, secular, Islamist, socialist, Islamic economics. And that's really it's making me very optimistic in Egypt. I'm looking for the Islamists who have swept the elections, mostly to be given a chance, because I think they will be swept out of the elections very quickly if they don't deliver, which is why I'm very optimistic that they will deliver, put all their energy and efforts into delivering on the economy.
I think it's a perfect way to lead to, because in some respects, I think there's almost a lot of pressure. I will never use the word miracle, because every time anyone talks about a miracle, it ends up becoming for naught. But there's no question, as I've traveled around the region, people say what Alfie just said, which is Turkey is being viewed as a wonderful series of inspirations, if nothing else, about things we can do. Can you talk a little bit in that same framework about what you're seeing, particularly among the young people and the really kind of tech-oriented entrepreneurships, and how you connect that to the broader trends in the region?
Well, I will do my best from a sort of more of an economic perspective, from an entrepreneurship perspective. I think, first of all, what we have seen in the past decade has been, at least for me and probably also my father's generation, is a very unprecedented period of stability in terms of political stability, in terms of our economic stability. As you know, we have had a lot of trouble with inflation, high inflation in the 90s. And inflation sounds like just a technical term, but it impacts how you live and how you think as a whole country, meaning you start to look at things in a very short time frame. You think in terms of months, not years. I'm not talking even about decades. So I think there is a lot of things that has changed that is not easy to put into words. But what I see is, especially given the trends and what is happening in Turkey in the last 2 years, you can say that we have had a lot of excitement and interest and growing, entrepreneurship ecosystem. A lot of, successes coming online, coming to be known internationally. But if you look, 10 years ago and how these things happened, stability is very important. We always had good educated workforce, especially engineers. The school system in Turkey is such that the university entrance exam, my Turkish colleagues will know well, pushes everybody, the best and the brightest, to be either engineers or medical students. So by definition, the smartest people in Turkey choose an engineering profession, and usually the highest ranking is electrical engineering or computer science. So for decades, I mean, we have had all the best talent actually going into these tech areas that we see today as the source of great, innovation and entrepreneurship. So we always had that actually. And then infrastructurally, we had a lot of good things happening in parallel. Physical infrastructure, transportation, telecommunication, and payment systems infrastructure. Now, if you add these things up, again, it is not a miracle. I mean, these are one thing at a time in different areas, doing the right things, and then the combination of these things coming together actually then, creating an environment where what we talk about today actually happens in a faster pace. And so I don't think there are any sort of lessons I hear it today and I do it tomorrow, but there are very strong trends and that has been in the play for a long time. And when you add to this mix the stability of the fact that literally as an investor and as a family member, as a household father, you think about not months, but when you start thinking about years and you start planning for the next year or the 3 years ahead, a lot of things change. Yeah. I think that has a very important
So very quick, before I move on, I want a quick follow-up for you and Alfie, a quick reaction to you from this. You use the word stability, I think, 4 times in your sentence. And of course, as business people, we all think about stable environments or good environments. But I'll never forget a young entrepreneur who said to me, I hate the word stability. And it's not that the young man was saying he hates unstable environments, but for so many years the word stability meant keep you down, keep you from moving, keep you in. And so I'm sort of curious of how you think of that balance to what has been historical, maybe negative stability, to what we should be hoping for now. And Alfie from Egypt, it was an Egyptian who told that to me. I'd be curious to your reaction of that.
Actually, I should then qualify my stability. I'm talking about the very basics of stability. Like having less than 10% inflation, okay, and being able to go to a bank and get a loan for more than 3 months, so that the stability that allows for a bank to make that decision. So I'm talking about the very basics. The way I see it as entrepreneurs, they have enough of uncertainty that they need to tackle and beat and get away and sort of succeed. I think 1 or 2 of these additional instabilities, if they are not in the picture, I think that helps. And I sympathize with what that entrepreneur said, and I 100% agree. There has to be change, there has to be new things so that there are new opportunities. But I really hope that those changes are happening in the stable environment of economic growth, so that you focus on your business, not worry about your country actually not being able to make the next international payment.
Alfie, do we aspire to stable instability?
I'll give you kind of 2 quick thoughts on stability. One was, I was in Tunis a couple of weeks ago, and a Tunisian entrepreneur says, I'm really happy the system's changed because the old system was very consistent. You would invest, the family gets 50%, you get 10 or 20%, and there's a little bit left for me. All right? Yeah. So now that system's out and we have instability, I'm really happy. Yeah. In Egypt, most of us would like a little more boring, just a little bit more boring and calm. Right now there's a little too much instability. And I think stability is a very good thing, properly defined. So stability always was the suppression, and what I commented on before, which is the kids show no shame because they're bucking the stability and they're not taking orders anymore, and they want to basically plow their own road and just pave it right down, whatever direction they think. The one thing that has changed is no matter how much most of the youth disagree with you, they've learned manners and open-mindedness that really didn't exist very much in society. They don't have to be as dogmatic and fixed to their ideas. They're willing to listen. They will disagree with you to death. Okay? But the respect learned on social media, that you are forced, in spite of whatever is distasteful to you, you're forced to read it. You can react, but you're forced to listen. You're forced to read. They pause, they read, they understand what you say, they acknowledge that you've said it, and then we get into the discussion. That didn't happen before. You could never have a discussion with some of these real hardliners.
Faisal Sohail, one of the great venture capitalists from the West Coast, but a global citizen, if any, I've known. I suggested earlier on that the combination of the information technology, which you, of course, have been exposed to, but also the example of so much that's happened in entrepreneurship and innovation and comfort in investing, in albeit unstable BRICS and other emerging markets, means what's going to happen now can happen much faster. Does that fit with your experience, or what do you think?
Again, thanks for being here on the last session. I've had the opportunity to both build a venture capital fund in Silicon Valley over the last 10 years and also build in some of the emerging markets like India, China, and some of the European emerging economies. I think it's very instructive when you talk about BRIC, Chris. BRIC is really not BRIC, it's really IC. Brazil and Russia, really nothing has happened. I was just in Russia at the invitation of President Medvedev, and they are no further ahead than Turkey or anybody else. They are still basically trying to figure out what is venture capital, what is innovation, what is entrepreneurship. So it's really India and China. And I think it's very instructive to study India and China to understand why they are where they are. And I would say three critical things from our perspective that made India and China what it is. One is we were extremely comfortable doing business with India and China. India for outsourcing, China for manufacturing, number one. Number two, we were extremely comfortable with having Indian and Chinese employees. A lot of them went back. So having an expat community that went back to India and China with the know-how, with the business ethics of Silicon Valley, of the West, they brought it back to those countries. That hasn't happened really for Russia and Brazil to a large extent yet. And then the third component that really allowed that to happen was then they reached out to us in the West to create partnerships to invest in those regions. And I think when I look at Turkey, it really needs to follow something very similar to that. It's a great example of how it'll work. And you can also look at a lot of the other countries where it hasn't worked. So I think if you can attract some of the Turkish expats to come back to Turkey, companies that are used to doing business with Turkey, I think it's a great start. And then taking some of the local talent and reaching back into Silicon Valley, reaching back into the venture community, I think you can create partnerships to start investing. So I think it's very different. BRIC is really not, it's really India and China.
Do you think it'll go faster here?
I think it'll go a lot faster because the country is ready. The model has been proven. So there's an existing model that you can follow. So you don't have to reinvent the model. It took us almost 10 to 15 years to invent that model in India and China. They weren't ready for investments, and B, the model didn't exist. Today, Turkey is ready for both things. But it has to reach out to the West, and it has to show that talent on the ground in Turkey. Then I think we can create a marriage very fast.
Selçuk, running a barrage in Turkey, obviously there's a perspective I'd love you to react to from there, but your career has been based also on emerging markets around the world. And I'm just wondering how you reacted to his analysis.
I'm in full agreement with all the comments for up to now. Being a big fan of stability, being on the boring camp, I'd like to add a few thoughts on this one. With my, I'm an emerging markets veteran. I worked from Russia to Saudi Arabia pretty much all my life in the last 20 years. What differentiates a stable market is the regulatory bodies and the ability to form a single-party government. That is the comfort Turkey has been experiencing in the last 10 years. There's a government in place. They can decide on the monetary policies, fiscal policies, implement both of those in harmony, and then have an economy that continuously prospers. Now, when you have that supported with a well-functioning capital markets board, well-functioning stock exchange, fast-functioning competition board, and the proper legal system which allows you to enforce documents, contracts, then you have foreign direct investment coming in. But if you look at the last 20 years and if you compare Turkey and what we call emerging Europe, you will find that most of those countries in the first 10 years had much higher foreign direct investment than in Turkey. The reason is very simple. Turkey was not a part of the Second World War, and foreign direct investment right after the Second World War started coming into Turkey. So most of the players who weren't allowed in those countries were already present in Turkey. What weren't in Turkey was really private equity and venture capital until about 10 years ago. Institutional investors were very active in Turkey, public market investors, bond investors, equity investors, derivative investors, simply because of the existence of a proper regulatory system. But with the monetary policies and fiscal policies in place, economy started moving, then venture capital and private equity started coming in, and there's a huge growth ahead of us, in my view. And the example to be taken, if I may refer to Egypt, for example, which is a country I'm a big fan of, hopefully when the government stabilizes and the country is now able to go back to economics and the prosperity growth, Egypt, in my view, is the next Turkey in the region, hopefully.
Wow. Let's hope. Elizabeth, you have a remarkable sort of perspective. I don't think a lot of people know too much about the project that you run in the Draper-Fisher family. If you wouldn't mind giving just 30 seconds on what this is, because it's really unusual. There's nothing really quite like what you've created, and if some of your perspective on what you're seeing out from a global, with the lessons learned here, would be terrific.
Sure. So what Chris is referring to is DFJ, Draper-Fisher Jurvetson itself is a Silicon Valley venture fund, which is fairly similar to many others. What we have done, and the founder of DFJ, Tim Draper, started this about a decade ago, was set up a network of partnerships with venture funds, first throughout the United States, and then we've taken it global over the last 5 years. So today we have 16 venture funds that we partner with throughout the United States and as far as Vietnam, Korea, Japan, Russia, multiple funds in China, Israel, Western Europe, and Brazil. We have some by stage, some by sector, some that are regional in focus. So this is what we call the DFJ network, and that is what I focus on managing on a day-to-day basis.
Share some of the perspectives you've had for some of the other countries that you have that would be relevant, you think?
Well, I think there was a really interesting comment, Faisal, about the BRIC being EC. Because I agree with your sentiments that India and China have a very rich ecosystem. So they have gone further in their venture development. And what I was very noticing over the last couple of days here in Turkey is the similarities with Brazil, and that you're starting to see Western Silicon Valley venture capitalists coming in because, as you said so eloquently, all the basics are there. The ecosystem is getting very rich. Venture capitalists from Silicon Valley are not really in the business of taking country risk. They don't really understand or want to do political risk. They want to do technology risk or entrepreneur risk. So as these countries look more familiar and they can understand what's going on and they have people they can work with in markets, you see a real influx. And you're starting to see in Turkey what you had for the last, 9 months in Brazil happening. So it's very, very similar.
Yeah, maybe in terms of the development stage of those two, which is interesting because Brazil is considered to be a developed or highly developing part of the BRIC versus Turkey isn't.
But not when it comes to venture capital. Venture capital
Exactly.
in Turkey,
right.
in Brazil is 10 years old, but it's still very nascent.
Right.
So, yeah.
So from that perspective, I think Turkey is no further behind than Brazil or Russia for that matter. So I think, definitely.
Yeah.
I was just there and I can tell you that for sure. But I think you make a very interesting comment that it's who venture capitalists are, who are we comfortable working with? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the highest degrees of comfort we have is people that we have known before. If in the case of expats Taiwan and tire industry started because Morris Chang decided to move back from Texas Instruments to start TSMC. He was somebody that everybody knew and dealt with. So Turkey needs that. I think needs more of it. And I think that would be a huge point of turning in terms of bringing Western venture capital to Turkey.
Because DFJ is very unusual in the network we have built. Most venture capitalists will do what you're talking about, and you've seen it in Brazil, where folks from California will find somebody they're comfortable with in Brazil and co-invest with them. And over the last 6 months, you've seen that same activity going on in Turkey, and I think this feels like the country's hitting a tipping point, and that will just, when one person starts doing it, other people realize they can too. And
it's led me to an observation which I'd actually like each one of you to comment to. It's a perfect lead in a way to talk specifically not just about venture capital writ large, but venture capital within these countries and within the region, because it's been a little eye-opening to me at one level of the amount of people who have a money. They've got the ability, they know what an investment is, they know they need to be part and parcel of something new that's happening out there, but they've been maybe historically comfortable with large physical structure, construction, real estate investments. They're happy with kind of big things, and there's almost this idea of, why do I want to put $100,000 in anything, or why is it so hard to raise a $20 million fund because it just doesn't matter, we don't care. Will this actually really create any jobs? Who cares? And it's been shocking me to hear this over and over again in every country that I've gone to. And I'm just, if I could get a quick reaction from each of you of how you feel about it, whether you think what I just said is wrong, and if it isn't, what do you think is going to be happening in your countries to take advantage of what I will suggest are opportunities that are happening anyways? Alfie?
Well, we have to be venture capitalists in emerging markets. It's more like adventure capital, okay? You're out like on safari, all right? Not a lot of laws, not a lot of guidelines, not a lot of borders, right? For example, to protect IP of companies that we set up we have Egyptian Kenjin, perfect example. To protect the IP, this young man is developing, he was just here, the previous panel, developing a lot of very interesting IP. To protect the IP, we set up the company as a Delaware corporation in the U.S. that owns the Egyptian subsidiary, which is the one that employs people, rents his office, and all the IP is assigned to the U.S. corporation, right? When you talk to somebody about being a minority investor in a company in the Middle East, they have no interest. The only way that somebody does a minority investment in the Middle East is if your majority partner has more to lose by losing face by taking your minority share, because the courts don't give you any protection.
Interesting.
Right? So you invest, small minority with somebody who has a big piece and much more operations somewhere else that they risk losing by taking away your little piece, because the law gives you zero protection.
But would you say that if the law was different on that all of a sudden people would be rushing into venture? No.
I think a lot more people would consider it, definitely, because the headache you get from a $100,000 investment is the same headache you get from a $5 million investment.
Why bother?
Okay? Why bother? At least make it worth my while.
So you're nodding your head. Do you agree? And what's your experience here in that?
I'm in full agreement. And again, being on the boring camp, I see some people yawning when I speak, but I'd like to add a few points on this one. Who you do business is more important in these markets than what you do, really. In my investment banking days, for example, I had the unfortunate case of doing a deal where the local partner in that country breached the shareholders' agreement on 16 clauses on the first year of the partnership. And the foreign partners sued them in the court of arbitration, and it took them 5 years to execute the decision in that country. So it's really essential who you partner with. Whereas on the other extreme, in one of our portfolio companies, again, in our region, during the crisis, our partner there underperformed. And without us asking for it, he came to us and he offered 20% extra in equity just to make up for our losses. So it's essential who you partner with, because documents, even in Germany, who I consider as the most solid economy in the world, enforcing a document means huge loss of IRR in the next 1 to 2 years.
But if I could on this, and I'll ask your view maybe a little bit this too, because I don't think that you're being boring, but I sometimes wonder if it's both narrow and short-sighted, because so many of the, which I love so much about being with the young entrepreneurs, is we all here can sit around and say, there are all these problems, we don't know what to do about them, the system is broken, Europe is collapsing. And while that's all happening, we have young people saying, I have a new way to come up with a new energy, which is going to take care of desalinization, which is going to take care of water being more drinkable and reachable more cost effectively everywhere else. I was just with the GIST as a judge, and young person after young person was solving problems in interesting, innovative ways that might be $100,000 today, but one day, not only is it going to take much, much more capital, but it's going to take a huge ramification in changing society. And so how do you balance this sort of why bother that you articulated, and with this idea of the size now as opposed to that we've got in innovation incredible opportunities to create things of scale and size going forward?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can convince those people by talking to them, but it's just at some point, if they see as an investor their self-interest in in investing these type of opportunities, then I think that time will also come. But then the question is, where will those examples come from? I think the early entrepreneurs with the arrows on their back, but eventually who succeeded and created a lot of value and wealth, as always and as in other places, also in Turkey, they're becoming investors themselves. And since they have been through that road themselves as entrepreneurs, they know all the issues, they know all the perils, but at the same time they know that there are ways, or there are instances where, one of them being themselves, one can succeed and succeed very significantly. So what we are seeing now is, you call them, okay, we can call them angel networks, or you can call them individual investors, but the ones that we are seeing today in Turkey, now they're also forming, VCs, local VCs, but most of the investors are the entrepreneurs themselves, the early entrepreneurs. But as they invest, they, convince one or two of what you would call more traditional investors. And I think, given enough time, like a couple of years, not a decade, this thing will go mainstream. And I think that is one of the key things, as we were discussing in this conference, that I made a note to myself, is in Turkey right now, what we're talking about is actually taking this ecosystem to go mainstream. I mean, we have examples of successes in different fields, in terms of fundraising, in terms of exits, in terms of new investments, in terms of angel networks, but there's like onesies and twosies, okay? You can count them with my one hand and maybe two hands at most. But the point is, as this trend continues, then this thing will become mainstream. Then investing in these kind of funds will be mainstream. Working with these kind of funds, or being an entrepreneur itself, is becoming mainstream. And if you look at it, I see three basic legs that this whole thing stands on. I mean, in different, you can categorize differently, but one is definitely the innovation itself, and the second leg is what we call culture, meaning knowing that this is okay to do. You can go ahead and be an entrepreneur, and it's a respectful thing to do, and it is a right kind of risk to take. And if you do it, you're not going to be sort of cast as an outsider or a strange somebody who doesn't have a job, which we hear stories among our own friends. People tell me that his or her mother, when she tells her that she's working for a startup, and the response is, why don't you go and get a real job? I mean, you have had all this education, and why don't you work for a large corporation? But I mean, these are not just one isolated example. But so let's group all of this as culture, and the third piece is finance itself. And I think in all of these three legs, I think the key is to make them move in lockstep. If one goes far ahead of the other, then still the ecosystem doesn't perform well, in my opinion. So I think we're, at least in Turkey, we're at the point where we are trying to take these things mainstream, make it part of daily life, so that these things become normal and accepted as normal in terms of investment vehicles, in terms of career choices, in terms of risk-taking. So going back to your question, I had a long detour.
No,
but basically, early investors are the entrepreneurs themselves who has been successful, and they keep doing their own businesses and keep investing in new businesses, and they are doing this in a more structured way through angel networks that they recently formed, through venture capital funds that they are starting up actually locally. And given a year or two, and given that boring stability of economic stability and political stability, provided that it is there, I think in 2-3 years' time we will have a different kind of panel discussion here, which is what should be the regional role of Istanbul in VCs and innovation and financing of innovation. I hope that we will go there.
But I need to be clear. I don't think you went around at all. In some respects, you may have said one of the most important statements, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, that has been said in this gathering, which is, it sounds like to you we've almost reached the tipping point, that this isn't 10 years but 2, and if that's what we're talking about here, it's one of the most profoundly important things for people to realize, that in fact the future is here, because everyone here under 30 knows that to be true. But to hear a hard-nosed, serious, unbelievably successful business executive say that, I think is something that's very important for everybody to be considering. Am I putting words in your mouth, or do you think we've actually hit that time?
No, actually, I'm borrowing Beezer's word. Yes, I think we're at the tipping point to go mainstream and make this thing, a real economic, fact of our economy, at least. And as I said, our goal is and should be in the next couple of years to make this vision into a regional perspective and make Istanbul, as we have 2023 targets as 100th year of our republic, make this an integral part of that in terms of what I say, innovation and innovation finance. Make Istanbul a center for that.
I want to call on you, so go.
I'll just add to that, and I think I agree that we're at a tipping point, but I think what's more important is that the tipping point is a lot easier today than it ever has been. Say it again. A lot easier. The tipping point is a lot easier today than it ever has been in my experience. 17 years of building companies in Silicon Valley and then 10 years of investing. I've never seen an environment like this where you can start companies for $250,000. For under $1 million, you actually can get exits and significant exits, and you have. For under $1 million, you know whether you have something extremely valuable on your hands or not. It used to be you had to spend $10 million before you knew you had anything. So to me, Turkey is at a very interesting tipping point because you don't need $30 billion venture capital firms with 20 partners to figure out whether you have something. 5 small funds investing $500,000 into 20 deals. In 2 years, you will know whether you have something significant. And to me, that's a big difference in the history of building enterprises for the last 30 to 40 years in Silicon Valley. And so Turkey can really benefit. You're sort of entering that time today. You don't have the baggage of, spending billions of dollars in bubble venture capital deals. Now, there are certain types of deals that if you're doing energy projects or breakthrough solar technology, that doesn't fit. You need something else. But there is, I think, right now a very interesting time for Turkey to run with this.
Please. I have a question to panelists, including yourself, Chris. Given what you said, and I agree 100% that it is much lower cost to create or at least start something and test it and see if there's value there. So given that, what would you recommend for us or for countries in this region to focus on? VC or angel investing? If there is a way to differentiate, distinguish the two and focus on one or the other, how would you kickstart and where would you start?
To me, there is no difference anymore between angel investing and venture capital. Even from our last fund is $400 million fund, and I've carved out $20 million and given it to one of our junior partners to invest, as an angel fund, and he can write $500,000 checks without even asking me. And that really is spurring innovation at a very different level. So we are acting like angels. So now if that was a $20 million fund, that's all you would need. But if you have a $400 or $500 million fund, fine, you can even allocate $20 million as an angel. So to me, that's the new game. That's a new way to play it.
The answer for me from whether angel or VC is yes. That's the answer. Yeah. Alfie?
I would look at it I agree with Faisal completely. Don't make a distinction between angel and VC, but look at it in a different way. What three things do the countries need to do for the community? Number one is the education, and Turkey has it, and I think Egypt has it. I think several other countries don't have the technical education. Egypt, the educational system is horrible except for this.
Be slow on this. So when you talk about technical education, you're talking about something
computer
very
science, electrical engineering, on that part. Okay, I'm focused only on VC, not entrepreneurship in a broad sense.
But some people, I think computer science for a big job at IBM is the same thing as what you're talking about, but it's not the same.
We address that with phase two. So phase one is the government needs to have the educational part. The angel/VC component is established and can be encouraged with very little money. The point Faisal made is a game changer. Nobody's going to lose $1 billion chasing bad internet deals like in 2000. Okay? That's not going to happen anymore. And then the last thing is recreate the football pitch. Okay? And for me, the football field where everybody's playing is University Avenue, Palo Alto. What we're trying to do in Egypt is to recreate a couple of streets where we concentrate 10 or 20 companies and make it cool and put a couple of coffee shops in and have the guys hang out in the coffee shop, because the two people from Silicon Valley will tell you that's where the inspiration happens, because it's very much like a chemical experiment. You throw the things around and a couple of the balls hit each other and they merge. Okay? That's the part that's missing in our societies here, and that's the part where cooperation is needed that a single individual can't do, possibly public and private, to establish that little kind of the virtual pitch where everybody's going to get out and play and people are going to run into each other and make something new.
I would also suggest a complement to the angel VC question, and to say really rally the celebration of your entrepreneurial heroes, because the changing of the culture will have to be motivated by having new stories. And it not limited to a venture capital entrepreneur, but entrepreneurs in general, so people can see that you can create something. And, it's not based on who or what you are in society, but what you do. And that's a very big part of what creates that energy in the United States, and is very meaningful in other countries to try to break down the cultural barriers. People don't say, why are you doing a startup? Go get a real job. They read in the paper, like, that's so great. Why are you going to college? Go do a startup, right? you get that kind of language in the States, which is, controversial of its own, but...
And I think what to learn, particularly, and for a lot of folks here, I bet you there are a lot of people who don't know what WAMDA.com is, or Habib Haddad. I don't think people necessarily of a certain age know what ArabNet is, and Omar Christidis. And there are these, not only the great entrepreneurs, but organizers of the entrepreneurs who are not only convening thousands of people physically in your country in celebrations, but are tens of thousands or more online. And it's not hard to reach out and get a sense of what kinds of things are being developed in that way.
I just want to make a quick comment on something you said, which is computer science is where people get educated to go work at IBM.
Yeah.
That's a glorious thing to happen. People getting educated to go work at IBM is wonderful, and it's a good thing, and it's needed. And some of them will stay there and have great careers and come up with great research that somebody like Kenjan or somebody else will build on. Number two, some of them will leave and go to the football pitch that we're building because it's cool, right? And some of them will leave and go somewhere else and start something completely new. So we don't have to educate for an entrepreneur and, create guys who can play pro basketball every day.
I'd like to open it up for a couple of questions in a moment, but if I could ask each one of you one quick hit on two questions. If you could have anything done, we were sitting around, this conference is a gathering of great people in the policy arena, but certainly very successful business people as well of a certain generation. If you could ask in the short term, one thing to happen, if you could raise your hand short term, that would have a multiplier impact in this tipping point that we've described before, and one thing to watch for the longer term, if you could each give me an example from your purviews of each, and then I would open it up to see if there are any questions from the audience. Alfie will just come down the line.
The one thing is, I'm going to talk to everybody here who runs a company or works with a government agency. Stop writing RFPs and giving business to multinationals. Give business to the little guys. That's the thing you can contribute, okay?
Here, here.
That's what you can contribute to promoting entrepreneurship in your country or in your field, okay? Give those guys a chance. In the U.S., there are set-asides for women-owned firms, small firms, minority firms, everything. Some people are against that. Some people are for it. They can sit down and discuss that forever. Here, I'm telling you, make a mandate. Tell everyone, if you're the minister of X, tell every one of your companies that reports to you or that you have authority over, give some % of your business to small companies, okay? You'll start the wheel turning by yourself in your country. That's your homework assignment.
That's a good one. I would say from all the deals that I've seen in the emerging markets, from Dubai to Egypt to Turkey, the one thing that they consistently lack is the ability and understanding of go-to-market. So anything the community can do to help facilitate the go-to-market strategy, which is really connecting these companies to the West, connecting them to the partners, to the channels, will absolutely accelerate the success of these companies in the very short term. And that's one area that I've seen consistently. Almost every company in the startup world that's trying to do a global play, it just absolutely lacks that understanding and that knowledge.
Do you have a concrete example that you've seen either in Turkey or elsewhere in MENA that would be an example of doing it being done right here?
I've seen it basically pretty much consistently everywhere. Where they're wonderful engineers, they have a great idea, they've built a product, and now they're sitting there saying, okay, who do we sell it to, and how do we get to that person, how do we open that door at the buyer, or at the partner, or at the channel. That seems to be consistently, they seem to be at a loss when it comes to trying to figure that out. So I think a concerted effort to help solving that can be done at a much higher level. You don't have to repeat it at a much lower level for every company. That's some place where the government can play a role, State Department relationships can play a role, opening up doors at, whether it is Facebook or Zynga or Yahoo or Google, whatever it is for the particular company, can make a huge difference for a lot of these emerging players.
Elizabeth?
Well, I think I'm going to repeat what I said before for the short term because it's easy. Celebrate your successes, celebrate your entrepreneurs, write about them everywhere. The point of this is you will show other people that it's possible. You only need to show people a couple times and they'll do it. My second one's a bit more long-term and heavy lifting. What really kicked off the venture capital industry in the United States was pension reform. And this sounds very boring and wonky. I'm in the boring stable camp. But if you create liquidity, if you create people that can then invest in your venture capitalists, invest in your private equity, they need to get their money from somewhere. So in the long term, you need to think about that. And I understand there aren't pensions in the same way in Turkey, so I don't know what source of funds to be tapped. But if Turkey can create its own engine for investment through whatever reform is necessary, that's what's really kicked things off in Brazil. And you see Russia trying to do it. India has it. China does it in just spades. So it's long term, but that's my big one.
Part of the growth in entrepreneurship comes, in my view, from recognition and also acknowledgement and envy. In the case of Turkey, I think both TOB and Endeavor are doing a wonderful job, and I'm involved with both of them. There's a case study which I can give very quickly. About 2 years ago, one of our relatives came back from business school in the States. I tried to help him get a job with one of the investment banks. Somehow it didn't work. He didn't like it. They didn't like him. This year, I saw him in Endeavor selection panel. He had set up an internet company, and first year EBITDA was $600,000. So, but this, for example, a case like this has to be in the media. So what I would ask TOB and Endeavor is to promote people like this and get them recognized so that they encourage more people who are planning to do similar efforts.
Tom?
Actually, the short term and medium term, this is advice and also something that I try to practice with the companies that I'm involved, and also a hope that, going back to actually Ahmed's point, the partnerships are important. I mean, all these small startups with constrained resources, I see them time and again trying to do many things on their own, and they try to go it alone. And there are many areas that they can actually partner with some smaller or larger or similar sized companies, so that together they create a market. They figure out how to go to a market, and that is really still not as prevalent. And one of the reasons is, I think, there's still this notion of, like, I have an idea and this is a great idea, and if I share it, if I talk about it, and if I start doing some work with some others, I'm gonna lose it. But the thing is, I'm coming from the camp of, ideas are dime a dozen, and yes, if it is something that you can get a patent for, go ahead and get it. But not every patent means a great business idea, not a great business. It's simply an idea, but not a business. So we are still in that stage. And I hear very often, I ask questions like, I have an idea, you're an investor, or not me, but okay, there's an investor, and I go there, shall I share it? And I say, well, if you don't share it, what are you going to do with it? I mean, literally, it's just, what are you planning to do with it? You are not going to be able to do something on your own. So at some point, you need to share it. Then the question is, how can I protect it? Again, the answer is, if you can get a patent, and if it's going to make you feel comfortable, go ahead and do it. But most likely that, there are out there a handful of people, maybe hundreds of people with similar ideas. But the difference is, you sit on it and someone else is doing something about it. So this is also cultural. And with these kind of celebrations and stories and kind of like entrepreneurs talking about their own experiences, some of these points come out very openly and very, honestly. And I think that also helps people understand how this thing works and how they can go about sharing and collaborating from early stage and then really creating a business. So I will welcome any suggestions how to create those, football pitches, those areas, those environments that people come together, share, and create something new by sharing.
The only thing that I would add, which many of you have touched on, and I thought Arif captured quite beautifully the other day, is to celebrate failure, which is very difficult in any culture, in any place. But at the end of the day, every great entrepreneur I know has been able to articulate to me something they failed, but what they learned from it. And whether we're parents or whether we're investors or whether we're people starting companies together, it's the hardest thing, I think, for all humans to get their minds around, but it has huge ramifications in people feeling they're safe to try, which is very powerful. So I started this by saying the long run is now. I think they've confirmed it. We have time for a couple of questions. Please.
Thank you very much. It's really inspiring to see that investors believe that the economic future is not exclusive to mega corporates and governments, as Mr. Ahmed Alfi said. My question is directed to you, Mr. Ahmed. Unfortunately, not all governments follow the same successful economic model like Turkey does, and not all mega corporates play the game fairly. How do we, the entrepreneurs who are not in Turkey, what can we do or not do to avoid being crushed by our government's policies, by our unfair mega companies? In the last couple of years, I have several friends who had their startups that had horrible incidents with when they came to the same market with other major companies. So what's your advice? Like, how can we use you to, as investors, to push towards making the policies of our governments in Egypt, in Jordan, in the MENA region to be more fair towards the smaller companies and startups? Thank you.
So my advice to entrepreneurs and small companies is the same I would give you if you were a 5-year-old going into the schoolyard and the bullies are going to beat you up. Make friends. Go find people, find mentors, seek out people like us, other people, tell them your story, make friends, get people around you to help protect you, and know that you're going to get beat up every once in a while. All right? It's just going to happen. I'm sorry. That's life. Now, are you tough enough to get up again and say to everybody, the barrier stops everybody else, not me. And if you get up and do that, the people that you've sought as friends will support you more, okay? And they'll give you more protection the second time around. So you can make it, but you are going to get beat up. So just accept it. No, I'm completely against that. Okay? Don't move to a better territory. So, you know, if you're in Egypt, great, stay in Egypt. If you're in Turkey, stay in Turkey. Help grow. If you need to move somebody, move a part of your operations for business, for optimizing the business, for getting better investors.
I'm sorry, we have one question here and one there in just a moment, please.
Okay.
Konumuz girişim sermayesi için yeni merkezler. Ben panelistlerden şunu bekliyordum. Yeni bir girişim merkezi için yeni bir merkez kuruldu. Bu merkezden girişimciler gidecekler ve oradan sermaye ihtiyaçlarını karşılayacaklar şeklinde bir konuşma bekliyordum ama herkese soruyorum, yani bütün panelistlere. Sırasıyla bakacak olursak girişim merkezleri 100 yıl içerisinde Londra, Paris, Berlin, New York, Pekin, Bahreyn, Dubai, İstanbul görünüyor girişim için merkezler. Şimdi girişimciler de bu sermaye olan ihtiyacı için önce, çünkü bazı sermayeler batıyor. Önce fikir sahibi olması lazım, bilgi sahibi olması lazım. Daha sonra iyi bir planlama yapması lazım. Bundan sonra sermaye ihtiyacını temin etmesi lazım. Daha sonra üretim, dağıtım, satış ve sonunda kar elde etmesi lazım. Şimdi dolayısıyla bu aşamaları bilmeyen, tecrübesi olmayan bir insana girişim sermayesi verseniz de zaten başarısızlığa mahkum oluyor. Yani. O bakımdan girişimcileri eğitmekle ilgili bu tip panelleri kutluyorum. Yani bunu düzenleyen, başlatan Sayın Obama'yı da kutluyorum. Buraya katılan herkesi de kutluyorum. Şimdi bu arada bütün panelistlere şunu soruyorum. Girişim için yeni bir merkez önereceğim. Bu konuda fikirlerini istiyorum. Nedir bu girişim için yeni merkez? Yani sermaye için Dünya Merkez Bankaları Birliği projesi. Yani dünyada ne kadar merkez bankası varsa bir araya gelecekler. Dünyada ne kadar merkez bankası varsa bir araya gelecekler. Ve küresel bir para çıkaracaklar. Girişimciyi desteklemek için. Ve bu küresel paradan istifade etmek isteyen kişiler, girişimciler önce bunun eğitiminden geçecekler. Tam manasıyla buna ehil oldukları anlaşılırsa Küresel Merkez Bankası bunlara girişim sermayesi verecek. Bunu gerçekleştirdiğimiz zaman bakacaksınız ki nüfus bölü %10 kadar girişimci büyük bir patlama yapacak. Yani ortalama %10 girişimciye ihtiyacı var. Dünya nüfusu 10 milyar olduğunu düşünün. 1 milyar girişimciye ihtiyacı var. Onun için Dünya Merkez Bankaları Birliği projesini nasıl karşılıyorsunuz? Bunu soruyorum bütün panelistlerden.
If you don't mind, I'd like to take a quick cut and then let any of you join it. And for those of you who didn't have translations, he asked, he was surprised that this panel didn't talk about hubs, both from a financial perspective, that there's a place where capital aggregates around venture capital, and that also maybe that there are hubs technologically, and he named some cities that could be them or are them in certain areas overall. Until you have these hubs, until you have a quantity of money, you're not going to have the World Bank and other kind of institutions get into venture capital. Let me just say with my own bias, if we're waiting for the World Bank to build the ecosystem of venture capital, we're dead. So that's not, I think, the way to think about it. I can also tell you that in my travels, but I defer to you all, that when I've been in Istanbul and I've been in Jordan and I've been in Egypt and I have been in different parts of the United States, when I've been in Damascus, I've been in cities that would question the idea that there are other hubs out there that will own it all. Now, obviously, there are aggregations of things that transpire in very powerful ways. But I think one of the great revolutions of this technology today is not to kill the idea of hub per se, nothing is so extreme, but it is the ability that capital and creation and innovation can rise very successfully in multiple locations. But I would defer, particularly I'll start here, if you have a different view of this at all.
I mean, let me answer in Turkish. So it might buradaki konu büyük bir organizasyon gibi bunu düşünmemek lazım. Bu dediğiniz olursa ne güzel. Yani olabiliyorsa çok güzel ama bunun ötesinde zaten girişimciliğin finansmanı ile ilgili dünyanın birçok ülkesinde, birçok yerinde bu tip girişimler ve oluşumlar mevcut. Türkiye'de de başlamış durumda ve inanın ben buna kalbe inanıyorum. 4-5 sene içinde Türkiye o merkezlerden birisi olacak bu girişimciliğin finansmanı ile ilgili. Buna da inanıyorum. Dolayısıyla böyle büyük girişimlerin yani merkez bankalarının bir arada yapacağı şeyler bunu yapabiliyorlarsa bence burada kimse buna hayır demez. Ama soru şu hani bu olana kadar olmasını bekleyene kadar neler yapılabilir? Bu tamamen ekonominin kendi dinamikleriyle ve biraz önce burada konuştuğumuz faktörlerin bir araya gelip bir dönüm noktası oluşturması ile ilgili. Ve o anlamda da hani ben Türkiye olarak böyle bir şey beklememizin bile gerek olmadığını ve kendiliğinden mevcut durum devam ettiği müddetçe bu istikrarlı bir ortamda 3-4 sene içerisinde bunun gerçekleşeceğini düşünüyorum. Çünkü en güzel örnek Türkiye'deki private equity dediğimiz girişim sermayesinin başlangıç aşaması değil de büyümüş şirketlere yatırım yapan kısmı son 10 senede Türkiye'de bayağı bir ilerleme kaydetti. Şimdi bunun ilk safhada daha yeni fikir aşamasındaki şirketlere olan finansman tarafında da büyümesinin sırası geldi. Onunla ilgili çeşitli faktörler mevcut ve buna fokus olursak, buraya enerjimizi yönetirsek bence birkaç sene içinde Türkiye için en azından ve daha sonra da bölge için fark yaratacak bir noktaya geliriz diye düşünüyorum.
Anyone would like to add, and then we'll have one more question, please.
I'd just like to add one thought to that. The banks and venture capital are very different types of mechanisms, and you really can't mix those two asset classes. You know, banks is other people's money, which is low risk. People don't want to invest that money for high risk venture capital. Venture capital is very high risk money where you have to be willing to lose all of it, and it has to come with extreme amount of mentorship, management, advice that goes along with that responsibility. So I think trying to mix banks type of money versus venture capital type of money would only lead to disaster, because you'll end up deploying too much money without the proper mentorship, without the proper guidance, without the proper advice, and it would not lead to a long-term success. It would actually lead to chaos, which would actually cause further delays in developing this industry. So I think you have to keep them very separate.
We've got time for one more in the back. The gentleman with your hand in the air, you were up there. Yes. Does someone have a microphone, please?
I have a question about personal experience. I'm in the phase of signing a contract for my new startup, and the problem is investors don't get the idea how he can pay like $200,000, and I want to give him only like 10% of the company because it's about a new invention. So how the negotiation should go, and what is the trade-off between waiting for another investors? I'm from Egypt, in places like Egypt, and the trade-off of time wasting or start a company with this bad deal. So,
I think Alfred.
I was just. I mean, there's no real answer. We'll sit down and talk about it for 15, 20 minutes because it's a balancing act. You need 50 more facts to give you valuable advice. Anything else would be, trivializing your issue.
Thank you very much.
I can't thank you all again. Oh, all right, we're going to have one more, please.
Merhabalar. Benim sorum Gültekin ve Sayın Selçuk Bey'e. Biz kadın girişimciler deyip duruyoruz. Ben şöyle bir şey talep edebilir miyim? Demin merkez bankaları örneği verildi ama biz bulunduğumuz şehirlerde önceden kooperatif dediğimiz bir sistem oluyordu. Biz bayan girişimciler bir araya gelip bir şeyleri üretip ya da bir şeyleri sunmak istediğimizde, bilhassa Sayın Gültekin Bey, TOP bize belli bir milimde, yani 0.01 oranında güvenilirlik, yani kredi kalkınma fonu gibi değil de, yani biz de sizin ortağınız, işlerinizi takip etme açısından, götürme açısından. Mesela biz Mısır'a gittik. Mısır'dan müthiş teklifler alıyoruz. Ama güvenilirlikte yıkılıyoruz. Hani ne yapalım, nereye gidelim, kimden soralım? Hani ticaret odalarından önceden soruluyordu, bir bankaya evrak götürür gibi. Yani biz burada diyebilir miyiz? Biz bir kooperatif kurduğumuzda, girişimcileri bir araya getirdiğimizde, ürettiklerimizde, bakın bizim arkamızda TOP'ta Gültekin Bey bizi takip ediyor. 0.01 ortağımız. Yani bizi koruyor. O bizim için çok daha artı olmaz mı? Bu piyasada çünkü isim yapmış, belli bir yerlere gelmiş insanlarsınız. Sizin güvenirliğiniz insanları da ayakta tutabilecektir. Yani belli bir yere gelmede kendilerini destekçi görebileceklerdir. Teşekkür ediyorum, sağ olun.
I'm sorry. For folks who don't have earphones, the question was about supporting the women entrepreneurships, particularly to our Turkish companions. Could you give both brief answers, both in English and Turkish, though, so everyone could be sure to hear if they don't have the device?
Yeah, sorry. Let me start in English and then I'll come back to Turkish. The problem is I'm actually not a representative of TOP. I'm a member of one of the non-governmental organizations within TOP. So I don't have any authority to speak on their behalf. But for sure, I understand the need very specifically, and that actually is a common need for any new company or any small company, that when you deal with large companies, especially if you're dealing in international trade, the issue of trust and being able to sort of deliver the goods and deliver the money becomes very important. There are different mechanisms as far as I know, but again, I'm not an expert on that topic, but I will be happy to bring this topic up and learn more about it and bring this topic to the Women Entrepreneurs Council and Young Entrepreneurs Council agenda. And there are actually executives from TOP here, which I'm sure they heard this question. So again, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to you, but I promise I will try to find one, talking with the right people. I don't think I need to repeat this in Turkish. Hopefully there's a translation.
Anything you'd add?
I'm in total agreement, and I think it's a very valid request and point you had made. I'm in the same position as Göktekin Bey here, but one thing I can say, I'll give you my card on the way out. We as a firm do a lot of social investing and also direct investing, so we're happy to listen to you and see if we can help any ways.
Again, I can't thank you all enough for being here. The remarkable graciousness and professionalism of our hosts here, both in the Turkish government and the United States government, the Department of State. I can't really single anyone out, but I will thank Stephen Koltai, who assembled this particular panel, and it's just been a thrill to be a part of it, and so thank you very much.
Evet, değerli konuklarımız, böylelikle ikinci panelimiz de sona erdi. Moderatörümüze ve panelistlerimize teşekkür ediyoruz.